The origin story. 1958's tiny clause, massive consequences. Walk into the Capitol in 1958 and listen for the mood. American kitchens were changing faster than regulators could read labels. Congress knew the system needed a brake pedal. The Food Additives Amendment tried to install one, no intentional additive without pre-market approval. But lawmakers also knew you didn't need a federal hearing for table salt. So they carved out the GRAS provision, generally recognized as safe by experts, based on either a long history of common use or robust public science. That phrase was meant to be narrow. Think flour, not cousins of flame retardants. In the early years, FDA took it literally. The agency published and updated a list, ran a presidentially ordered reevaluation in 1969, and tried to keep the fence tight. Then reality hit. Petitions piled up. Budgets didn't. Through the 1970s, oversight shifted. By 1972, FDA introduced a voluntary GRAS affirmation process. Manufacturers could come in with their dossiers, and FDA could agree or not. It was still the agency's call, but the center of gravity moved from a formal, slow petition to a looser route. Fast forward to 1997. Facing decades-long backlogs for full additive petitions, the agency proposed another pivot, a voluntary notification program. Companies could self-determine that a specific use of a substance was GRAS and notify FDA. If FDA reviewed the file and had no questions, the company pocketed a comfort letter. If FDA had questions, the notifier could withdraw and reformulate, or just not notify in the first place. The rule wasn't finalized until 2016, but FDA operated under it for years. In 2021, a federal court upheld this structure. The keyword didn't change: voluntary. The fox didn't just guard the henhouse, it wrote its own background check and stamped it approved. Here, S where the ambiguity became a business model. The statute says qualified experts. In practice, companies assemble panels, often consultants hired by the notifier, to review internal and published data, conclude GRAS, and sign reports that never have to be public. FDA can challenge later, but absence of evidence gets sold as evidence of absence. Meanwhile, trade secrets shield recipes. Your ingredient list is a statement of intent, not a full inventory of what the process added or what migrated from packaging. It's like reading a movie poster and calling it the script. What this did on the shelf is hard to miss if you travel. The same candy that lost titanium dioxide in the EU kept it here under a safe in small amounts stance. The same breads that ditched potassium bromate abroad still listed it in US bakery flour. Synthetic dyes that require EU warning labels about children's activity and attention arrived here without a caution box. Companies didn't fight nature, they adapted to law. Where rules required removal, they reformulated. Where safe could be supported by a GRAS file and a no-questions letter, or no letter at all, they stayed the course. The defense sounds practical. FDA can't pre-approve every substance in a modern supply chain. GRAS lets obvious, low-risk uses move without clogging the system. Fair point if GRAS stayed where Congress aimed it, but the category drifted, like don't eat dessert before dinner somehow becoming cake is a vegetable. Novel emulsifiers, processing aids, flavor solvents, entries with thin public literature slipped in under self-determination. Even when companies notified FDA, the exchange often ended with a non-binding note that the agency had no questions, not a regulation that set conditions or limits. That subtlety got lost in press releases that treated no questions like a stamp of approval. The result wasn't an immediate wave of disasters. It was something slower and stickier. A market full of quiet additives you didn't vote on, layered into ultra-processed foods that dominate US calories. Recent analyses link higher ultra-processed intake with increased risks across cardiometabolic and mental health outcomes, even after adjusting for calories. No single additive drives it all. The cocktail matters. The emulsifiers that bother the gut, the dyes that carry behavioral signals in sensitive kids, the antioxidants that ride controversies for decades, the whitening agents that raise genotoxicity flags overseas. It's not a smoking gun. It's death by 1,000 snack hacks. Meanwhile, FDA's posture has started to shift at the edges. Brominated vegetable oil now moving out after decades. Synthetic dyes under new pressure. GRAS itself. The agency has floated steps toward mandatory notification, which would at least get ingredients on the agency's radar. But the core remains. generally recognized as safe, still opens a door that industry can walk through without knocking. Here's the human story inside the statute. Congress tried to keep salt off a lab bench and push everything else onto one. Budget and backlog bent the arc. Industry learned the terms. Experts became a rentable service. And safe, a word that should anchor public trust, became a shapeshifter. If you want to see how that word splits your pantry from Europe's, we follow the playbook next. How self-approval replaced oversight, why FDA can't review what it never sees, and how no questions turned into a marketing asset. Then we'll hold US labels beside their EU twins and count the differences you can't taste but you can read. The self-approval machine. How GRAS quietly replaced oversight. To see how self-approval replaced oversight, follow one ingredient from brainstorm to checkout. An R&D team develops a new emulsifier that makes low-fat ice cream feel creamy. Under the old food additive petition path, they'd ask FDA to approve it, run full toxicology dose, response studies, and accept use limits codified in regulation. Under GRAS, they assemble a dossier, hire qualified experts, and conclude the specific use is generally recognized as safe. Then comes the fork. Notify FDA or don't. If they notify, FDA screens the file and often replies with a short letter. No questions at this time. That isn't an approval, it's an acknowledgement. No binding regulation, no enforceable conditions beyond what the company described. If FDA does raise questions, the notifier can withdraw. The paper trail evaporates. Reformulate quietly, reframe the use, or proceed via self-determination without telling anyone. Either way, the label later reads emulsifier, and shoppers never see the debate. Zoom out and the pattern repeats across thousands of substances. Flavor solvents, enzyme preparations, dough conditioners, anti-caking agents, and processing aids that don't have to be listed at all. Trade secrets cover recipes. Proprietary methods shield details. FDA retains authority on paper, but absence of notification creates absence of visibility. You can't evaluate what never lands on your desk, especially when 99% of new entries take the side door marked, "Trust me, bro." Here's where conflict of interest does its quiet work. The statute says consensus among qualified experts based on publicly available science. In practice, GRAS panels are often convened and paid by the notifier, review a mix of published literature and internal summaries, and sign off. Many experts are reputable toxicologists, but the payer writes the brief, and the full package rarely enters public view. Peer review moves from journals to conference room. The public sees a marketing line. FDA often sees nothing. Meanwhile, no questions becomes a sales tool. A courtesy letter turns into reviewed by FDA in trade decks, reassuring retailers and co-packers. The nuance disappears. What stays is momentum, an ingredient that migrates into dozens of SKUs not because FDA prescribed conditions, but because no one officially objected. This is where the cocktail effect outpaces the rulebook. GRAS determinations look at a substance in isolation under intended use. Real diets stack exposures, emulsifiers in bars and dressings, synthetic colors in cereals and drinks, antioxidants in snacks, whitening agents in candies, plus packaging migrants. Recent analyses associate higher ultra-processed intake with increased cardiometabolic and mental health risks even after adjusting for calorie. No single additive explains it all. The mixture matters. GRAS isn't built to test mixtures. Inside companies, incentives line up. Time to market beats years of petitions. Legal risk feels manageable. Document your determination, retain consultants who can defend it, follow good manufacturing practices. If a state or retailer later tightens specs, reformulate then. Revenue starts now, the cost lands later. Engineering tweaks keep lines running fast, bright, and uniform. Labels stay familiar. Only your baseline exposure changes. The voluntary system creates a data mirage. Because notification is optional, FDA's GRAS inventory is a partial map. Because trade secrets hide use levels and matrices, outside scientists can't reconstruct real-world exposure with precision. Because processing aids can avoid labels, consumers can't opt out. And because no questions isn't a regulation, enforcement is mostly post-market, warning letters, recalls, nudges, rather than preventive. There's a time problem too. GRAS conclusions can age without scheduled re-reviews. A panel's 2005 consensus might rest on 1980s era endpoints, never systematically updated for modern concerns like microbiome shifts or vulnerable populations. The European model enforces periodic reevaluations. Here, reappraisal depends on petitions, headlines, or state action. Companies adapt when they must, not because a clock demands it. Meanwhile, the line between GRAS and food additive blurs in practice. Novel emulsifiers, flavor vehicles, and solvents with thin public literature slide in under self-determinations. When firms do notify, many outcomes land as no questions, not codified limits. Press releases treat those letters like approvals. Retailers accept them because they need paperwork to move pallets. The machine hums. Think of the Tara flour episode as the punchline you never wanted. A novel ingredient, self-affirmed as GRAS, entered the market. Consumers reported serious illness, including liver injury and gallbladder removals, before anyone hit the brakes. Only then did FDA conclude it didn't meet GRAS and was an unapproved additive. That's not every ingredient. It is the risk when your first date with the regulator is a recall. Regulators aren't static. In 2016, FDA finalized the GRAS rule, formalizing voluntary notification. In 2021, a federal court upheld the structure. Now the agency is exploring mandatory notices, so at least they see what's coming, and tightening on outliers like brominated vegetable oil. But until notification is required and periodic review is real, generally recognized as safe, remains a door industry can walk through without knocking. This is the moment everything changes for our story. Once companies discovered compliance could be two-track. No questions here, bans or warning labels there. The same brands wrote two recipes. Not because chemistry demanded it, but because law did. The global split. Why your pantry is illegal overseas. While that self-approval machine hummed here, Europe built a different reflex. If credible red flags appear, tighten exposure while you learn more. You don't need to read a statute to see it. Just put a US label next to its EU twin and watch the ingredients change. Start with color. In many European markets, synthetic dyes like Red 40, Yellow 5, and Yellow 6 carry a plain sentence on packages marketed to children, may have an adverse effect on activity and attention. That one line nudged brands to swap plant-based colors or mute the palate. Here, the same cereals and candies ride in without a warning box because the US doesn't require it. Parents in London read a caution. Parents in Louisville read nothing at all. Now the whitening agent that turned candy aisles into case studies, titanium dioxide. In 2021, European scientists said they couldn't rule out genotoxicity. A year later, the additive came off EU shelves. US products, well over 1,000 by independent tallies, kept listing it under safe in small amounts, leaning on older methods and a higher tolerance for uncertainty. Same brand, same product line, different calculus. Remove where the rule closed, retain where the loophole stayed open. One label reads precaution, ours reads fingers crossed. Bread tells the story in dough. Potassium bromate, added to strengthen gluten, is banned in the EU, the UK, Canada, and others after animal studies linked it to cancer. European bakers rely on thyme, enzymes, and ascorbic acid. US mass-market flour still uses bromate unless a retailer spec or a state law says otherwise. You won't taste the difference. You read it if the label tells you at all. Citrus sodas are a timing lesson. Japan barred brominated vegetable oil decades ago. The EU wouldn't allow it. American bottles kept BVO until FDA moved in 2024 to revoke authorization nationwide. Between those dates, global brands ran two supply chains. Export markets got reformulated recipes years earlier. Domestic fans got the legacy blend because they could. Same fizz, different era, depending on your zip code. Fast food kitchens draw their own split screen. Multinationals publish additive policies by region. European menus list fewer dough conditioners and petroleum-based dyes because the regulatory floor is higher. US menus often carry older specs until a state bans a compound or a retailer demands a change. The fries look the same. The spreadsheets don't. Why the divergence? Law, enforcement, and posture. Europe centralizes additive approvals, sets group restrictions, and schedules re-reviews that drag old assumptions into modern methods. Labels reflect those decisions, warnings, usage caps, or outright bans. The US carves out GRAS, tolerates self-determination, and updates after evidence accumulates or pressure peaks. We backstop with litigation and voluntary guidance. They backstop with binding rules and mandatory timeline. Walk a supermarket with this map in your head. A candy that lost titanium dioxide in Madrid still glows here. A cracker relying on BHT or BHA stays legal stateside next to a European counterpart reformulated with tocopherols. A children's drink dyed to match the mascot crosses the Atlantic paler or labeled with a behavior warning. It isn't that Europe solved food. It's that uncertainty triggers action there and argument here. We debate, they delete. Industry adapts fast. Dual recipes are standard business, a global base, then regional swaps to meet law and expectation. The incremental cost is minor compared to distribution. The benefit is every market stays open. When a US state tightens, the cleaner spec often becomes national because running 2 SKUs invites logistics pain and PR risk. The lever isn't outrage, it's compliance math. Retailers act like shadow regulators. In the UK, major chains publish free-from lists for house brands because customers expect it and law nudges it. In the US, several grocers restrict certain dyes, bromates, or BHT-BHA in private label. The aisle looks safer under those logos than under national brands still pointing to federal allowances. The public doesn't vote on the molecule, it votes with a cart. There's a human angle buried in bureaucracy. Parents in Berlin can pick a familiar cereal knowing that if it contains specific dyes, the box says so plainly, or uses alternatives. Parents in Boston must know dye names, scan for numbers, and guess about interactions a label never mentions. A baker in Milan never orders potassium bromate. A plant manager in Milwaukee keeps it in the silo until a buyer's spec says stop. None of this means every European choice is perfect or every American ingredient is poison. It means the burden of uncertainty lands in different places. There, on manufacturers through upfront restrictions and warnings. Here, on consumers through research and avoidance, unless a state intervenes. The practical result is 2 pantries under one brand family. One codes to caution by default, the other trusts after the fact. If you're wondering who profits from that split, follow what stays on shelves until law changes and what vanishes only when it must. Then follow the coupons and the hospital bills. Next, we trace the money. The money trail. Cheap calories, expensive bodies. Follow $1 from factory to cart, and it explains the label better than any talking point. Ultra-processed wins because it turns pennies into margins and minutes into habits. Fresh inputs spoil, vary with weather, and demand cold chains. Additives stretch shelf life, standardize texture, and tame supply shocks. If your job is to fill 50,000 stores the same way every morning, chemistry beats seasonality 8 days a week. Start at the plant. Corn becomes syrup, soy becomes oil, starch becomes modified starch, protein gets hydrolyzed into umami. Flavor houses blend natural flavors that are trade secrets. Color labs match brand tones across crops and seasons. Emulsifiers keep water and fat from separating so a sauce survives a truck ride and a hot end cap. Antioxidants keep oils from going rancid. Acidulants sharpen taste so you need less fruit. Each add-on costs fractions of a cent per serving and buys time, consistency, and faster lines. Those seconds matter at 600 units a minute. Step into finance. Shelf-stable inventory ties up less capital. Predictable yields make quarterly plans neat. A donut that lasts 2 days demands waste write-offs. A packaged pastry that lasts 6 months wins an end cap far from any bakery. This is how a box that costs 30 cents to make sells for $3. Processing compresses volatility, and volatility is expensive. Advertising knows the pitch. No artificial flavors sits beside natural flavors, which can be identical molecules with a different supply story. Made with real fruit, rides on concentrates dosed in drops. Baked, not fried, lands on starch foams engineered to shatter like chips. The front promises grandma, the back prints the lab, Little House on the Prairie out front, Breaking Bad in the fine print. It's Little House on the Prairie on the front and Breaking Bad on the back panel. Meanwhile, the health ledger pays the bill. Recent large analyses linking higher ultra-processed intake with increased risks, cardiometabolic outcomes, depression, anxiety, still show signals even after adjusting for calories. One headline number lands hardest. Top-tier UPF eaters show up to 50% higher cardiovascular mortality versus low-UP eaters. Mechanisms are messy but recurring. Emulsifiers disturbing gut barriers and microbiota, refined matrices spiking glucose, packaging migrants and additive mixtures nudging low-grade inflammation, hyperpalatable designs overriding satiety. No single molecule sinks the ship. The cocktail raises the waterline. Industry funding shapes the headlines. trade associations underwrite reviews that focus on calories and macronutrients, framing processing as neutral if the numbers balance. Ingredient-by-ingredient studies miss the mixtures that real plates deliver. And because GRAS allows safety files to sit in corporate drawers unless voluntarily shared, equivocal findings don't always meet daylight. No evidence of harm at typical doses travels further than we haven't examined mixtures well. That's not science. That's vibes. Cheap at checkout, brutal over time. Families stretch budgets with multi-packs because cash and time are tight. School districts sign with the lowest bidder. The lowest bidder stretches sauces and breads with stabilizers that survive freight and reheat. Hospital cafeterias do the same because procurement is built for price per case, not microbiome endpoints. The cost shows up in nurse logs, absenteeism, and insurance premiums years later. Invisible on a Tuesday receipt, glaring in county health stat. Marketing doesn't need to lie, it needs to lean. Whole grain dusted on neon cereals to hit a threshold. Protein boosted with isolates and enzymes that change texture more than outcomes. Low sugar swapping in polyols and high-intensity sweeteners that keep the craving loop alive. The goal isn't nourishment, it's repeat purchase with plausible deniability. Retailers reinforce the loop because end caps and eye-level bays pay rent. Manufacturers serve as category captains, advise planograms, and nudge high-margin, long-code products to prime spots. Produce is a destination, snacks are an impulse. The path winds accordingly. Policy plays calendar whack-a-mole. When one additive draws heat, BVO, Red 3 brands roll with the punch, reformulate, and keep the rest. Voluntary guidance replaces rules. Encourage sodium reduction, consider dye alternatives. Without deadlines, spreadsheets win. The exceptions prove the rule. When a state sets teeth, California on bromate and propylparaben, national lines quietly align because dual SKUs hurt logistic. Workers feel the edge first. In plants, powders and solvents ride the air. In warehouses, ultra-processed pallets move faster than cold chains. In schools, heat and serve replaces cooking. Custodial and cafeteria staff see rashes and coughs long before a journal does. Their logs rarely make budget meetings. Here's the punchline nobody prints on a box. The cheapest calories are subsidized twice. First, by agricultural policy that makes commodity inputs cheaper than produce. Then by a medical system that manages the fallout. The margin sits in the middle, between a processing line optimized for flow and a marketing line optimized for glow. Can the math flip? It already does in pockets. Retailers with additive policies for house brands force supplier reformulations. Chains that count total cost of ownership see fewer nurse visits and better attendance when meals lose certain emulsifiers and dyes. Brands that publish additive maps and testing earn trust and still sell. Until rules make externalities count, the money will keep flowing where time and texture are cheapest. The label will keep whispering, safe. The aisle will keep glowing, and the bill will keep arriving, just not at the register. The playbook, lobbying, lawsuits, and label theater. If you want to understand why safe keeps winning the shelf, sit in the rooms where rules get written. The first move is language. Trade groups arrive with model definitions that sound technical and land like marketing. Spring water framed by geology that fits a borehole, natural flavors broad enough to hide a palate, processing aid that avoids labels. Lawmakers juggling dozens of issues accept tidy phrases that harmonize with industry practice. One comma later, disclosure turns into discretion. While that's happening at the State House, preemption bills slide in under the banner of uniform standards. Cities that want stronger warnings on dyes or tighter limits on titanium dioxide find themselves blocked by state law that freezes rules at the federal floor. Uniform sounds efficient. In practice, it locks local experiments out. The message to mayors and school boards, wait for Washington. Meanwhile, the aisle hums along. When regulators propose upgrades, mandatory GRAS notices, scheduled re-reviews, dye warnings, comment dockets fill with white papers funded by trade associations. The tone is polite. The argument is relentless. Economic burden, supply chain disruption, consumer confusion. Independent scientists submit 10 pages. Trade coalitions submit hundreds. Faced with uncertainty and thin budgets, agencies stretch timelines and shave requirements. Guidance replaces mandates. Calendars slip. If a state pushes anyway, the next move is court. When California targeted potassium bromate and propylparaben, complaints warned of interstate commerce burdens and federal preemption. The goal isn't always to win outright. is to slow everything down until a compromise arrives with soft edges. Delays make money. Each quarter without change pays for lawyers and lobby breakfasts. In parallel, SLAPP suits muzzle critics. A small nonprofit posts a report on dye links to behavior. A cease and desist lands alleging defamation and false advertising. The group spends months fundraising for counsel. Even if the suit fades, the chilling effect lingers. Researchers watch and choose less public work. Consumer education retreats to safe generalities. Marketing handles the rest with label theater. No artificial colors, swaps in exempt colorants refined to the same palette. No high-fructose corn syrup becomes corn syrup solids or sugar blends that hit physiology similarly. Made with whole grains, sprinkles enough flour to cross a threshold. Baked, not fried, sells puff starch foams engineered to shatter like chips. All legal, all designed to soothe. The front of the pack sells a feeling. The back prints the truth in fine type. Transparency gets framed as a QR code. Scan and you land on a brand story with lifestyle photos and a vague ingredient gloss. If lab data exists, it sits behind contact forms or in PDFs that lump categories together. Meets all applicable standards, replaces numbers. If a dye warning would have to be plain in Europe, a US label leans on color names parents don't recognize. The point isn't to deceive outright, it's to outlast attention. Retailers become leverage points and the playbook adapts. When a major chain tightens specs for house brands, no bromate restricted dyes, suppliers comply quietly, then use the new spec as proof other proposed rules are unnecessary. Market-driven change is working, they tell legislators. The part they skip: it took looming state law and retailer pressure to move the needle in the first place. Crisis response is its own art. A headline hits, BVO flagged, titanium dioxide scrutinized, Tara flour sickens consumers and trucks roll with donations. Pallets arrive at schools and clinics with banners that read, "We're here to help." It's real aid and reputational armor. Months later, reformulation press releases tout updated recipes without naming the ingredient that left. The fix becomes a makeover. Education becomes silent. It's the PR version of "nothing to see here," while the ingredient quietly exits stage left. Inside standards bodies, method debates stall inconvenient truths. Is microplastics detection validated at useful particle sizes, which PA analytes qualify for routine screens? Until the method is official, labels carry no obligation to mention anything. The absence of a test becomes the absence of a problem. Funding steers discussions toward endpoints that fit existing rules. Even consumer wins get amortized. FDA moves to revoke BVO. Excellent brands already pivoted overseas. California bans Red 3 in some products. Labels shift on those SKUs while the broader dye palette stays. Each concession becomes a shield. We follow the science. Meanwhile, the rest of the additive stack remains intact. Insulated by GRAS files nobody has to submit and expert panels paid to agree. Legal settlement language keeps sunlight out. If a case over natural claims resolves, terms prohibit disclosure of depositions that might help the next plaintiff.